August 18, 1966. A rubber plantation in South Vietnam. 108 Australian soldiers. 2,500. Enemy fighters. What happened in the next 3 hours would be called impossible by military historians, covered up by politicians, and forgotten by the world. Until now. To understand what happened at Long Tan, you need to understand who D Company was. These were not elite special forces. They were regular infantry soldiers, young men, most of them barely 20 years old, drafted into a war they didn't choose, fighting in a country they'd never heard of. The year was 1966. Australia had sent troops to Vietnam as part of its commitment to the United States. But from the beginning, the relationship between the Australians and the Americans was complicated. The Americans had a specific way of doing things: massive firepower, overwhelming numbers, bomb everything, then walk in. The Australians had a different philosophy: patience, discipline, small patrols, living in the jungle for days at a time, understanding the terrain, becoming invisible. The Americans thought this was madness. Why patrol when you can bomb? They would soon find out why. D Company, 6 RAR, had arrived in the Phuoc Tuy province earlier that year. Their area of operations was a former French rubber plantation, rows of tall rubber trees stretching for miles in every direction. The rubber trees were eerie, silent. You could walk between them for an hour without seeing a single animal. Nothing moved. The locals called it a cursed place. They weren't wrong. Intelligence reports had been coming in for weeks. Something was building in the jungle near Long Tan. The 275th Viet Cong Regiment, one of the most experienced, most feared fighting forces in South Vietnam, had been spotted moving into the area. 2,500 battle-hardened soldiers. But the date was August 18th, and D Company had just held a concert the night before. Cold beer, music, laughter. For a few hours, they'd forgotten there was a war. The next morning, a patrol went out to investigate some mortar fire from the previous night. 11 men, a routine sweep. They walked straight into the 275th Regiment. The contact report came back to base in a voice that tried to stay calm but couldn't. "We have enemy, a lot of enemy, a lot of enemy. Send everyone." Major Harry Smith made a decision in under 30 seconds. He would send D Company, all 108 of them, into that plantation. His commanding officer tried to warn him, "Harry, we don't know what's out there." Smith's reply has since become legend in the Australian Army. "That's why we're going to find out." At 3:40 p.m., they walked into the plantation. It began to rain. At 3:45 p.m., all hell broke loose. The first wave hit Delta Company from 3 sides simultaneously, a coordinated attack that military experts later said required months of planning. The Australians dropped to the ground and fought back. Here's what you need to understand about what happened next. For every Australian soldier in that plantation that afternoon, there were 23 enemy soldiers, 23 to 1. And the Australians didn't retreat. Private Noel Grimes, 19 years old, held his position for 4 hours with a broken radio, no way to call for help, knowing that to move was to die. Corporal Phil Dobson, wounded in the first minutes, kept firing, kept giving orders, kept his section together. At base, Major Smith was making radio calls that would later be called the most desperate communications in Australian military history. He needed artillery support. He needed reinforcements. He needed ammo. The artillery was given coordinates that no gunner in his right mind would approve. Because the Australians were so surrounded, the shells would be landing just meters from their own positions. The gunner on duty stared at the coordinates for 3 seconds. Then he fired. For the next 2 hours, in pouring rain, with visibility down to 20 meters, D Company fought off wave after wave of attacks. They had run low on ammunition. Multiple men were dead. Dozens were wounded. And still, they held the line. At 6:30 p.m., when the relief force finally broke through, they found something extraordinary. The 275th Regiment, 2,500 soldiers, had broken contact and was retreating into the jungle. Not because they ran out of men, not because they were afraid, but because they could not understand what they were fighting. Later, captured enemy soldiers were asked in debriefs, "Why did you pull back?" Their answer has never been officially published. One soldier in a declassified 1993 document said this, "We thought there were thousands of them. No one fights like that with so few men. We thought it was a trap." The morning after the battle, they counted the bodies. On the Australian side, 18 men killed, 24 wounded. On the enemy side, 245 confirmed dead, hundreds more estimated. 108 men had fought and broken a regiment of 2,500. When the American general commanding the region was briefed on the battle, he reportedly sat in silence for a full minute. Then he said, "I've been in 3 wars. I've never seen anything like this." But here's what makes this story darker. For years, decades, the Battle of Long Tan was barely mentioned. The Australian government gave D Company no parade, no hero's welcome, no public recognition, because the Vietnam War was unpopular, and recognizing the bravery of these men meant acknowledging they'd been sent there at all. The men of D Company came home to silence. The Battle of Long Tan is now taught in military academies around the world, not as a story about Australia, not as a story about Vietnam, as a study in what human beings are capable of when they refuse to accept the mathematics of defeat. 108 men, 18 of them never came home, and the world forgot their names for 30 years. This file is now closed. File number 001. Case closed. But there are more files that have been waiting even longer to be opened. File number 002 is already being prepared. Subscribe so you don't miss it.